Hi, I'm Sarah. This is the small chapel at Northern Seminary. Welcome to the show. And I bet you didn't know that near the end of Acts in chapter 21, when Paul is traveling back to Jerusalem, a prophet named Agabus comes, takes Paul's belt, and binds his own hands and feet, and says, "The Holy Spirit declares, so shall the owner of this belt be bound by the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem and handed over to the Gentiles." But Paul was still determined to go, so they went on to Jerusalem anyway. That must have been pretty weird, though. Some guy just comes up and takes your belt. I wonder if Paul resisted. I would have resisted. Presumably, Agabus gave Paul his belt back before they went to Jerusalem, because if not, that would have been pretty awkward for Paul. And that's just one of the things about prophets in the Bible that I bet you didn't know. Agabus is one of the few prophets we hear about in the New Testament. John the Baptist is another, and Jesus is also known as a prophet, although in his case he was and is so much more. Philip, one of the first deacons, also had 4 daughters who prophesied. The major chunk of prophecy in the New Testament outside the Gospels is the book of Revelation. Quick note, it's Revelation, not Revelations. It's singular. Revelation is unique in more than one way, but one of the ways is that it fits into more than one genre. It's prophecy, it's a specific type of prophecy called apocalypse, and all of it is wrapped up in a letter. We tend to think of Revelation as its own separate thing, but it's actually squarely in the tradition of Jewish and Christian prophecy. But we find the most prophecy in the Old Testament. In the English Bible, there are 17 books of prophecy. 5 are known as the major prophets and 12 as the minor prophets. What's the difference? The major prophets are longer. But in the Jewish Bible, there are 21 books of prophecy. Some of the books counted as history in the English Bible are considered prophecy in the Jewish Bible. Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles. These are known as the former prophets. What we call the major and the minor prophets are known as the latter prophets. And actually, it might be more accurate to say that the Jewish Bible only has 10 books of prophecy, because all of the minor prophets are taken as a whole and called the Book of the 12. Because there are 12 of them. You probably know that it was the prophet Nathan who confronted King David about his sin with Bathsheba and Uriah, but you probably didn't know that Nathan was also instrumental in getting Solomon on the throne as the next king of Israel. When it became obvious that David was going to die soon, his oldest son Adonijah tried to make himself king. He got support from the high priest and from Joab, David's military commander, and just began to act like he'd been declared king. He sacrificed a bunch of animals at a place outside Jerusalem and held a big banquet. Adonijah tried to get Nathan on his side, but Nathan said no. When all this was happening, Nathan went to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, and said, "Don't you see what's happening? If we don't act fast, Adonijah's going to be king, and he's going to kill us all." Adonijah would have killed them because they would have been rivals to his throne, because he already knew that David had decided that Solomon was going to be the next king. Nathan and Bathsheba go to tell David what's going on, and when David hears about it, he acts in no uncertain terms to make sure everyone knows that Solomon is his choice for successor. Nathan and a priest loyal to David named Zadok anoint Solomon king. In the last show, we talked about some female prophets, Miriam, Huldah, and Deborah. You'll remember that Deborah was a prophet and a judge of Israel, pretty much making her the final authority on everything. Samuel was also a prophet and a judge. He was the last of the judges and is called the kingmaker because he anointed the first kings of Israel, Saul and then David. Samuel was called by God to be a prophet at a very young age, and his very first prophetic mission was to go to Eli, the priest who had raised him when his mother dedicated him to the Lord's service, who had taught him to be a priest, to go to Eli and tell him that the Lord was going to severely punish him and his family because Eli's sons had been doing evil things and Eli didn't stop them. His very first assignment is to go to the man he's probably closest to in the world and say, "You screwed up and God isn't happy." That really is prophecy without training wheels. While there are other prophets mentioned in 1st and 2nd Kings, the main 2 prophets are Elijah and Elisha. Their names are so similar that their prophecies and mighty works are hard to keep straight. So let's see how good you are at that by playing Who Did That? Who purified a spring near Jericho by throwing salt in the water? Elijah or Elisha? Elisha! Who helped a widow pay her debts by causing the small amount of oil she had to fill up a bunch of jars? Elijah or Elisha? Elisha! Who was fed by ravens who brought him bread and meat twice a day? Elijah or Elisha? Elijah! Who healed the Syrian general Naaman by having him dip himself in the Jordan River 7 times? Elijah or Elisha? Elisha! Who was involved in a showdown with the priests of Baal on Mount Carmel? Elijah or Elisha? Elijah! Who was called the Tishbite because he was from Tishba? Elijah or Elisha? Elijah! Whose bones caused a dead man to come back to life when his body was thrown on him? Elijah or Elisha? Elisha! Who stayed with a widow in Zarephath and helped her and her son survive by making the little bit of flour and oil they had never run out? Elijah or Elisha? Elijah! Who caused an axe head to float when it was accidentally lost in the Jordan River? Elijah or Elisha? Elisha! Who was taken into heaven by a chariot of fire? Elijah or Elisha? Elijah! Who parted the Jordan River with his mantle? Elijah or Elisha? Both! Elijah on the way up the mountain and Elisha on the way down. How'd you do? Never mind. Let's move on. Sometimes God had the prophets not just speak his messages, but act them out too. Isaiah walked around naked to show just how soundly the Egyptians were going to be defeated. They were going to lose everything. Isaiah 23 reads, "Then the Lord said, my servant Isaiah has been walking around naked and barefoot for the last 3 years." 3 years? What? Naked and barefoot for 3 years? Do you know how long that is? That's more than 1,000 days. Actually, scholars don't think he was completely and totally naked. They think he probably got to wear some sort of loincloth to cover his front, but not his back side. But the king of prophetic actions was Ezekiel. At the beginning of his ministry, Ezekiel has a vision in which God commands him to eat a scroll, which he does. We could write this off as being just a vision and not real life, but time and again the Bible tells us that visions for the people having them were very real and sensory events. So whether or not Ezekiel outside of a vision physically took a scroll, chewed, swallowed, and ate it, the reality of the vision is such that that question doesn't matter. Ezekiel ate a scroll. Ezekiel also, on God's instructions, takes a clay tablet and draws a diagram or a picture of Jerusalem and then pretends to lay siege to it. And he doesn't do this half-heartedly either. He builds a little ramp and little siege works and enemy camps all around the tablet, and he sets little battering rams against it. It probably would have been really cute and cool and stuff if it wasn't for the whole, divine judgment thing. After the siege of the city is all set up, Ezekiel then pretends to be a siege victim. He lays on his left side facing the city for 390 days. That's more than a year. And he eats according to siege rationing, which is a near starvation diet. He's allowed only 1 cup or about 8 ounces of food a day and only 3 cups of water a day. His food is bread that he's commanded to make with a mixture of grains and legumes that would produce really nasty tasting bread. And he's required to cook this bread over human excrement. I'm taking be involved in a siege off my bucket list. Now, I would have raised objections before now, like, can I have bathroom breaks during the whole laying on my side for a year part? But it's the human excrement part that Ezekiel protests. Ezekiel is a priest as well as a prophet, and eating such food would make him ceremonially impure. So God says, fine, you can use cow excrement instead. We don't have time to go through all the strange prophetic actions of Ezekiel, but maybe one day we'll do a show on it. Because believe me, there's enough to fill up a show. Jeremiah was another prophet who did a lot of prophetic actions, though usually not as strange as Ezekiel. Usually. There was that one prophecy about an undergarment. But Jeremiah is better known as the weeping prophet because of all the hardship he endured and all the bad news he had to deliver. Jeremiah lived in Judah in the years before the Babylonians came and conquered the kingdom and carried most of the people off into exile. Jeremiah was the prophet who kept telling the people that this was going to happen, and no one likes that kind of news. They kept telling him, dude, stop saying these things, and he's all like, but this is what God told me to say. They didn't really listen, though. They hated what he had to say so much that at different points in his life, he was beaten and put into stocks. He was seized by an angry mob and almost put to death by them. And he was thrown into a cistern, which is like a big clay pot underground where they collected water. He was thrown into that cistern and he was left there to die. And he only didn't because one of his friends came to the king and asked to get him out, and the king said, "Okay." His hometown, his friends, and even his family were involved in a plot to kill him. To kill him! That is one family in some serious need of therapy. His friends and his family were against him. The religious leaders, the priests, and the other prophets, false prophets, were against him. And the civil authority was against him too. That's the king. Actually, 3 kings. He prophesied for a long time. Jeremiah also had a secretary named Baruch, who plays a big part in his ministry. You know, everyone names their kid Jeremiah, but no one names their kid Baruch. It's a good name. You could call him Barry, or Rookie, Rocky, Jeremiah. And finally, I bet you didn't know that if Jeremiah is the weeping prophet, we should call Jonah the whining prophet. You probably remember that Jonah is the guy who got swallowed by a big fish, but after that, he gets so irrationally angry that he asks God to kill him. Twice! The first time was when God forgives the people of Nineveh, and Jonah hated them, and probably all Assyrians for that matter. The second time is when his plant died. Ugh! Just kill me, Lord! You know, people not dying and one plant dying. Really good reasons to ask God to kill you. Come on, Jonah, get a grip. Thanks for watching. Hope you had some fun. Maybe you learned some things. If you have a suggestion for a future show, leave it in the comments and I'll get to as many as I can. So until next time, may your commute be full of green lights. Bye.